joined today by Bray and Trevor. Here we have in the AM three bleary-eyed gentlemen that are trying to wrestle up, something to talk about. And so today we want to talk about post-truth. This is a new topic for me. The kind of deal to let you in on kind of the backstage things going on. Bray knows about this concept, and so we'll be relying on him a lot and his sources for information. And this episode, we wanted to do something a bit creative. We wanted to show you live reactions on camera of me and Trevor understanding this topic, our first bites on it. We're not even, I don't think we can digest it, don't you think, Trevor? We'll have to digest it over the next, week or so. But the point is that this will be our knee-jerk reaction, so forgive us if we say something even potentially off color, all right? We don't plan to get canceled, but, we'll see. We'll see. But look, post-truth, the question is, why do people like misinformation? We've all seen it. We've all heard it. I want you to think, dear listener, about every time you've seen some Jim Bro science out there that is completely false. If we upgraded that a little bit, every time you've been lied to by a politician. If we made it more personal, every time you've been lied to by a friend or a colleague and you knew that they were lying. Why do we do this? Why do we play these games? That's the question at hand. Okay, so I'm going to skip Bray for a moment, and I want to hear from Trevor specifically. We'll get a lot of information from Bray here later. But what do you think?
What do I think of post-truth society, that sort of thing?
Well, just in general. I mean, maybe even the question, why do people like misinformation? And maybe that's kind of a weird way to put that, but what I mean by that is, why do we insist on playing these games of lies and half-truths?
Oh, I see. Well, I think it's much easier. There are these stories that we live in. There are many different stories that you live on each given occasion in each given moment, and it's so much easier to just have that story. And whenever you encounter something which counters that story or runs antithetical to that story, it takes much less time. It's so much easier. It corrals in you so much less dread just to forcibly align that information or forcibly miscount that information in service to your overarching purview or idea or narrative. It's so much easier. And with that in mind, you have situations today, information today. If you go onto the internet, if you go onto Twitter, X, Facebook, anywhere you want to go, you're going to encounter a lot of information. It's quite different from what you might consider something you would see in the 1600s. You have so much information all around, and it's so easy to just feed and feed and feed upon those things which serve your overarching narrative, feeding and feeding and feeding and feeding. And to me, it's not so much so targeting misinformation. Like, why do people like misinformation so much? Because truth is mixed in there too, often enough. It's a mix. It's a very large mixture of all sorts of things, and people just feed on that. And what you might call misinformation can be swallowed hook, line, and sinker as you keep on swallowing more and more of a particular narrative. It's easier that way. And it's more so, I think what's more important, it's not so much so that you eat misinformation as much as you discount and then immediately forget about unhappy truth, something that is true, that targets you at your very core. For example, I'm initially from I was born in Texas, born in the United States, and I, went to classes on Texas history, United States history. I learned about the Constitution, all that sort of thing, about the Revolution, American history. And you have a certain uh, building up uh, pride or some sort of nationalism in oneself as one grows up in that sort of environment. And then you start to hear about things which run antithetical to what you might consider uh, which you consider what the United States is, which you consider your country to be. And for a lot of people, not everyone, but for a lot of people, your country can, in a sense, become sort of a aggregate self, or form itself as a construction, an arcing mask of your overall ego, an aspect of yourself. And it can feel as if it's an affront to your very self when someone tells you about massacres in Vietnam, when someone tells you about the current situation in other parts of the world right now, current things that the United States is doing that you don't like. And it's very easy, just as one goes like that, swipe, 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 swipe. Just as you see something right now, right in front of you, that runs completely counter antithetical to what you believe is to be true, you immediately swipe up, it's gone, you never think about it ever again. You look for the things which, I was going to say attenuated to, but that's not the word, that you are attuned to. You find what you are attuned to, and you attune further. And that is what you are. And sometimes misinformation feeds its way in.
Okay. Well, so Bray, start us off on post-truth. I know that we're probably going to quickly get into the political realm, but I want to, you know, put a kind of topic out there. Um, I'll put two out for us: misinformation versus disinformation. I know we've talked about that before, and facts versus feelings. I mean,
Mhm.
let's talk about it.
Sure. And yes, it will get very political very quickly, because this is sort of the word or the term post-truth. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'm referencing a book by MIT Press called Post-Truth here. But it looks like around 2016, when the Oxford Dictionary called it the 2016 Word of the Year. And that's because of Trump and Brexit, stuff in that avenue. So it's very much political. And these were a sort. There's a few examples in here that I would use to sort of give somebody an idea as well of what this means. So just Trump alone, if you recall, all those years ago, Trump claimed that his inauguration crowd size was like the largest since like Reagan or something like that. But it was not. If the photographic
I
evidence
do I do
exists,
recall that.
we can look at the
Yeah,
photographic evidence. He claimed that if he did not win in 2016, I believe, then that the election was rigged. He still continues to claim that about every election that he's in or is going to participate in, that if he loses, then you will know it's rigged, which is such a weird thing to say. But again, besides that, he also claimed famously in 2016 that he actually won the popular vote, which no
Michigan.
Republican candidate has done in several years.
Right.
In fact, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote in 2016 by, I believe, almost 3 million votes. But this is the sort of thing that we're trying to figure out: is Trump intentionally lying? Like, does he know that this stuff is not true? And this goes for everything, not just Trump, by the way. I'm just using him as an example because he's a big
He's such an
reason
easy
why
example to
we're here.
use. Yeah.
Yes. Does he know he's lying and he just continues to do it because he knows he can get away with it, which is a sort of central part to the idea of post-truth? Does he just not care enough about what is actually the truth and is more willfully ignorant in that avenue, which I think is where most people fall. or is he like literally just completely I clueless? I that's why I think what we're trying to figure out here is maybe even for like the average American, say like where are these people falling? We definitely have pockets of people,
So,
but
mm,
go ahead.
yep. To talk about Trump here, it sounds like when you first say like, well, what's on his mind? Like, what is his state of consciousness? What is his state of mind when this happens? When this whole thing about the stage and like how many people are on it during his inauguration? What's his state of consciousness? What's his state of mind? It's difficult because we quite literally are incapable of ever knowing. Not without some very thorough examination, let's say, not something we have privy to us or will likely ever will have available to us. These are the sort of things that historians will talk about, like American historians will argue about for the next several centuries. Like that's going to be one of those sorts of things. I want to take a step back though from Trump and instead look at this whole idea of post truth and this idea of people lying to us. And I want to say, speaking specifically just of Trump and his in this instance, like mistruths, his non-truths, his lies. There, I want to put that aside, and if you think about it, uh, well, not if you think about it, but just to start like this, uh, it, I I find it very unlikely that his one state of consciousness that produces his version of mistruths, of his version of lies in that instance, is the exact same state of consciousness unilaterally shared across all politicians across the entire space and all pharmaceutical companies or all this or all this or all that. Like I don't really see that being that same one singular state of consciousness being unilaterally shared. It may necessarily be true, and we'd have to probably identify here and now what we mean by states of consciousness or direction or primary
Here,
ideology. It
and
seems to
I
me
feel
instead. Oh,
I feel like I need to interject just a little here. So and once again, listener, these are blind reactions, right? We're going in 100% blind. So, like Trevor, I completely appreciate what you're saying, and it is necessarily true. You and I do not share a consciousness and so on. But so my first thought, really my only thought is we're the same species. We're the same people, even. We come from the same geographical location in general. We have all the same cultural, things going on, and so on and on. We have to be more similar than we are different.
mhm.
And
Oh, sure.
dear listener, uh, if you catch my meaning here, we can look at past examples of people um, like these politicians or like us even, and figure out what they were talking about, and then extrapolate from there. We can extrapolate. Okay, well maybe we shouldn't make this mistake, or maybe we should do X, Y, and Z. And so, uh, like I say, like Bray's saying here, you know, does he know he's lying? Does he care? Those are big questions, and I do feel like they're answerable. I mean, does he know he's lying? Uh, Probably. Does he care? No, because he keeps doing it. You know what I mean?
Uh,
It would be like this: if
mhm.
you found yourself uh, with like if you were young, if you were a child, and you were playing on a playground, and you're still in those formative years where you don't quite know who your friends are. Uh, you start playing with another fellow child, and they just keep lying. You know what I mean? Like, we've all been there.
Mhm.
We've all met someone in our formative years where it's like, dude, I know you're lying, but I
Mm-hmm.
do not know how to articulate that's what you're doing. I just know something's up.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, or playing with a friend who like makes rules on the fly about what game you're playing. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Right.
It's like, dude, you're cheating, but I'm 7 and don't know
Yeah.
how to articulate that.
I don't have the social skills yet. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't have the presence to confront you on this issue.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to stop hanging out with you.
Right.
And this will form relationship, like these will be formative relationship things that inform us for years to come. Like, you and I are neighbors and we'll never see each other again because you lied
I'd like
at that one
to
time.
certainly.
But so anyway, my point is,
Mm-hmm.
just to wrap it all up again, is that even though what you're saying is true, we can extrapolate, and we should.
You most certainly can. It's a question of how close you can get to the mark. And I'd like to illuminate a little bit different what I mean by different states of consciousness here when it comes to lying. I think you make a strong point. So, firstly, I'd like to just lay out in front of us on the table of ideas different ways that someone could come across and become what you might call become a liar, not what you might call a liar. Someone who makes non-truths. So, first one I could list is someone who is an idealist, someone who has a philosophy such as communism. Maybe they're a Marxist. Maybe they're a liberal Democrat, like a liberal type person.
Maybe they're an ANCAP, whatever.
Maybe they're a monarchist. Well,
Yeah.
sometimes the needs of the ideology are far more important than the needs of the individual, and it's through that perspective, that sort of facade, that you can come across and then make lies to people. You can lie to people in service of something far more important. That's one state of consciousness. Another state of consciousness, you could have dementia. There are some forms of dementia. Alzheimer's disease could be considered a good example, where you kind of just make things. You don't necessarily make things up, what you do, but you kind of, somebody asks you something and then you go, oh, it's this, and you believe it's this, and then you come up with a story for why it's this. Like you go up over and open their refrigerator and start digging through it, and someone goes, what are you doing? That's not your refrigerator. And you're like, I bought this in '98. What are you talking about? When in fact you're in like a store, and like you're just rummaging through, and you just abstract or conflate an entire narrative for yourself. Now that's mistruth. That's another state of consciousness that leads towards mistruth, but it is very different from the first one I just offered. And then another one. Let's say you're a psychopath.
So Trump has dementia confirmed, right?
That's one thing that's one thing that some people say. Yes, that's one thing some people say.
We heard it from our fellow neuroscientist. Okay.
No, don't
quote him right here. Get the audio bite.
Yeah. You got to be careful. You can't ever pin someone on something like that specific.
No, you can never diagnose someone from a camera or anything
no,
like that.
At least I can't. But so, and then like here's another one, kind of an inversion of the one I said previously. You could have someone who not an idealist, but someone who is a realist instead, a sort of psychopath, someone who believes that everything is fundamentally just power and the expression of power. Therefore, there is no reason not to lie if you can get away with it. Someone who doesn't care about you and doesn't care about either one of you. That's a very different state of consciousness than the first two.
I don't think that's a realist, Trevor. Just be completely honest with you. I think your second term, psychopath, was a much better approximation. Because think about it this way: no one human is so substantially smarter than the other that every lie they could ever tell would be beyond reproach. For example,
that's very fair. But however, we're speaking.
Let's say that one person is a strong person, right? Mm-hmm. All it would take is three of his fellow apes who are a third of his strength to take him.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like that's what I'm trying to say. I think a realist opinion is one of observation.
Well, if we want to call it a psychopath instead, I do believe those people do necessarily exist, and I do believe that is a
they certainly do.
That is a state of consciousness, and as I illuminate the table in front of us, our table of ideas.
What I really mean to say is, like, whenever you talk about them in that way, I just think to myself, oh, they're an idealist of another kind, of a selfish sort. You know what I mean?
They're an ego idealist. It's all necessarily me. And in the world, the mass or the gravity, the situation,
very big cluster B problems.
Moves inward. Yes, cluster B. That's right. Yeah. So just to illuminate just three, I'd like to show by doing that, uh, show you if expound upon that other ways you could find yourself lying. And I want to say, when I illuminate these things, when I point these things out, what I'm trying to do is show that across our entire political spectrum, you have people lying for all sorts of reasons, all sorts of reasons. And what happens is you then have people like myself, Bray, and Stefan going in and then trying to make sense of the world, and also you, viewer, and try to take all of these lies, this misinformation, and create one coherent, cohesive political situation or political ideology to make sense of things. It's sort of like an ethereal ideology of misinformation, of post-truth. When it comes to us in all sorts of manner of ways, when it comes to individuals, then it creates this aggregate post-truth state of mind that we evaluate the system from. When it's quite different from an individual basis, like one to one to one to one. Now, I'm not trying to say that it doesn't exist. It certainly does. Like, we have this post-truth problem. But I do mean to illuminate it slightly when I say that when you try to expound why Trump lies, for example, you can't just say the way that Trump lies is the same way that all politicians lie. It's really quite more nuanced than that. It's really
That there
quite
are different
complicated.
types of lies, and there
Yes,
are different
we
kinds
see
of lies in those types.
yes, we have a post. We may live in a post-truth system, which necessarily allows for these sorts of things to happen. That you can pinpoint and then try to do things to stop it. That we can target. But if you want to try to diagnose all individuals that make up the post-truth problem, you'll run into problems. You'll fail because people lie for all sorts of reasons, ideological reasons, psychopathic reasons. Maybe they have dementia. It's
Maybe, maybe. Here's
all
here's
sorts
my
of
follow-up
reasons.
question to you, Trevor. Then,
Oh,
um, are and we can all talk about this, of course. Uh, are there more reasons to lie than to tell the truth?
Depends on
Um,
your. I think it depends on you personally.
I think it depends on even the situation, of course.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about in the most general sense you can come up with. And dear listener, you should put this in the comments below as well. Are there generally more reasons to lie than to tell the truth? Like, for example, I, I I don't know. Um, I've struggled with this very often, and as I get a little wiser, I think that there are very good reasons to lie. For example, if someone was threatening, harm to you guys or my friends, my other friends, and so on, there'd be very good reasons to lie. That their lives and y'all's lives matter more than my dignity, to type of thing. Um, as well, like, let's say that you're a struggling employee and you're trying to find another job, and your current job is quite immorally asking you if you are looking for another job, and you don't answer that question. You know what I mean? You just you say, nope. I mean, hey, So anyway, go ahead. Are there
Oh,
generally more reasons to lie?
I
hmm.
I don't know if there's generally. Like, I don't know. It's hard to generalize that. I would say it depends on who you are. There's far too many factors. For example, the difference
Sure.
between like me, a incredibly progressive person, an atheist. I'm these are things that put me on a very particular spot on whatever compass you want to use. Um, and of course, I don't think the things that I say are lies. I think I can back them up and justify them. But then you could take somebody who's incredibly more far right and they, are religious, and suddenly they might feel exactly the same way that I do. They may not feel like they're lying. But I would say, from my perspective, it seems like they would have to do a lot more lying. And on their side of the fence to get by in the daily world. And just a side note real quick, I don't want us to get too bogged down in purely lying, because the post-truth discussion does encapsulate a lot of different things. It just happens that lying is what is a way of communicating a point that's just not
For
true.
sure.
Even,
sure.
But Trevor.
I want to leverage in on this whole conservative perspective thing. I don't think this is where things get quite complicated, where the situation is really quite complex. I really doubt that an entire political philosophy in the United States, like what you can consider the conservative movement, is just hot smoke filled with lies and bags of tricks. Like, I really don't believe that. I believe, never a right way to start a conversation, but it seems as if there's in the same sense that you go off and have this whole perspective based on information that you receive to create this to expand and abstract this narrative you might call progressivism with these like tenets that you might possess. I do think that there is information available that leads to a conservative worldview, like actual valid information. You can draw different conclusions based on that information, but it could be perfectly valid information. I don't see any. I see nothing wrong with the conservative viewpoint. Truly, I don't. Like, really, you might do yourself some real justice here by going really far back and looking at a political situation of somewhere very far away. I mentioned it kind of too much, but I got really into ancient Roman politics for a little while. That kind of
as you do.
I got really into like the philosophy of like the Roman Republic before it collapsed, and there was a conservative movement and a liberal movement in Rome at that time, in the Roman Republic. And you had figures such as what's his name? Well, I'll start with Julius Caesar, who essentially led the liberal movement, and then later Pompey would become the figurehead of the conservatives, though he wasn't really a conservative. He wasn't in a general sense. He seized control of the Conservative Party, but really he was just anti-Julius Caesar. But anyway, it can kind of show you that if you go all the way back then and look at these political philosophies, you can see that there is actual juice in the squeeze, in the narrative, in the philosophy. There are things worthwhile in that state of consciousness. There are. And what can happen is, if you're not careful, you can disparage the entire philosophy of your interlocutor, your adversary, if you just assume that it's all hot air. When as a matter of fact, it's you have your philosophy valid, and you have their philosophy valid, and that's where things get scary, because you have to have this very complex, nuanced conversation.
But are two opposing arguments necessarily sound, right?
Well, this is a good point where I would say that we come into a new chapter in the post-truth thing. Is
Sure.
The next chapter, for example, on this document is science denial as a roadmap for understanding post-truth. So, for example, something I would look, and Trevor makes great points here about, and even just aside from that, don't mean to insinuate that I'm assuming that the Conservative Party is just full of hot air or whatever. That would be absurd to do such a thing. But do I believe that there are a large number of actors that are willfully ignorant to the truth, don't care about the truth, have other motivations such as financial motivations that persuade them to do certain things in action against the truth? Absolutely. Just as there are those people in liberal parties as well. However, I'm of the perspective that there are far more of those in the Conservative Party, and this is what I would point to, is something like the science denial that is going on now. The fact that there are two major political parties in the United States, and one of them is practically outright working against any sort of climate activism, et cetera. They are funded by oil companies that do not want us to turn away from oil production and consumption, et cetera, because financial interests, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I just picked climate action because I feel like that's probably one of the most unbiased points that I could go to. That you can't really spin. Well, this is solely a liberal point or solely a conservative point. I mean, this is the data is there.
So just real quick, I think one of the biggest problems we have with climate activism is that it has been branded a symbol of the left.
Sure.
And while I kind of have the talking stick, I wanted to tell a little anecdote. I was literally laying in bed. Like, this is seriously pillow talk. Okay.
We need like an edit where it's like the lights dim down and it's like a little
yeah,
spotlight.
you know what I mean?
And then the scene changes and you're like this.
Yeah, turn on the porn music and shit.
Pillow talk with Stefan.
Yeah.
There we are.
Seriously, pillow talk. And I look at my partner and I say, you do know that we live in a time of anti-intellectualism. And you know what I mean? It's like, and I was just sitting there going, I'm just so disappointed. I'm so disappointed. I mean,
oh my gosh.
It's true. It's true, people. I mean, like, we live in a time where intellectuals are viewed as like this other class of human, and it's just like this. None of that's true.
Anyone could be an intellectual.
Yeah, I think we all are. I think persons are all necessarily intellectuals. I think people in crowds of 2+ become anti-intellectuals. I mean, like, there's something about our chimp brains that activate whenever we're like together, and we just can't help it, type of thing. I think we can help it. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, like, there's something about it.
I have kind of something to come in with that to assert in conjunction with what you've just said, Stefan. So I want to take us back a little bit. A couple centuries ago, there was a gentleman by the name of Jean-Baptiste Joseph de Damre. He's French, so I mispronounced that entirely. But there's this gentleman who, using triangulation, basically just trigonometry, was able to create the first realistic, like actual realistic map of France. He and I believe his son and his grandson, maybe just his son, but like it took several generations to do this, went around measuring, creating accurate dimensions of territory within France, and kept on doing that and expounding it until eventually they had the first accurate map that they could lay out before the king. And I believe it was Napoleon or something that actually saw it. Or
accurate enough, anyway.
Accurate, considerably more accurate than what was done before. But while they were doing this, villagers would see them and call them witches and chase them away. It was quite common, and attack them because they were doing witchery. Why do I bring up this story? I mean to say that when we evaluate the system, when we evaluate arguments, such as, Stefan, the one that you just asserted, I wish to assert here that the reason why you see a world like completely covered with anti-intellectualism, like just promulgated with billions of growing anti-intellectual roots that affect everything. The reason why you visualize the world in those means is because you're an intellectual, and you see it according to your own, according to that particular viewpoint.
Sure.
You find the antithesis of your being, and you corral against it, or you fight against it in that moment. I mean to say, specifically to the viewer, this is quite an interesting thing to encounter whenever you speak to someone, because you kind of have to realize, well, this person's speaking of a very deep experience, of a very deep point made that influences the entire world at large. And I mean to say, when you hear these sorts of things said, it's very useful to also realize, well, who's saying it? Oh, an intellectual. And I mean to say that when I say the reason why it appears that way or not appears, because it is. The reason why you evaluate it that way has to do with your being and the way that you express what is Stefan, what is your ego, that sort of thing. Why do I say all this? I mean to say that it is anti-intellectual, but it's also very intellectual. It's many things. This world is a lot of things. It is anti-intellectual, and you'll find anti-intellectualism. Just recently, I started using X again, and I should.
It would be useless. It would be less than useless. It would be harmful to suggest that almost anything is so black and white as to say, I live in a time of anti-intellectualism. I live in a time of intellectualism. Like, of course, there are varying degrees of that.
But it's certainly there. And yeah. I mean to say now that I think I'm really getting your ism when you say something like that. It's kind of like at the very beginning of the show, I used to bring up very often, like, you can kind of see our neuroses in the show. Like, that's what this whole show is, just our neuroses. I don't mean to say that this is your neuroses in this instance, but I do mean to say that I think I certainly
tell you that it is.
Fair enough, but it kind of illuminates what is this being in time. What is your thrownness? What is your like your Dasein, if you want to be like Heidegger about it? You're sort of you illuminate fundamentally how you encounter reality when you say something like that, and I find that really interesting. And then we could all come together in front of the fire of ideas of this idea of anti-intellectualism, how we may fight against it. Just earlier,
I will say something I tell my students all the time. You must assume that anyone you are talking to knows something that you do not. So like, it is extremely true how you've put it. How do I encounter reality? All of that's extremely true. But let's just say that I'm talking to someone who, by some divine knowledge, I know knows nothing that I do not. I would still pretend as though they do, because they deserve that dignity. You know what I mean? I'm serious. Like, we have to assume, or at least pretend, that the people around us know something we don't. And I can hear Trevor literally talking in my mind right now going, well, of course they know something you don't. They have a story that's not your own. You know what I mean? So, in a way, it's kind of like a truism, but it's something that has to be said, especially to our young people, so often, But anyway, we should get back to
post-truth.
What Bray was talking about. We left off on the climate change signs.
Yeah, and that's just an example. So
it's just an example, right?
Yeah, this is the thing is, so if we are living in a post-truth society now, where people are more concerned with how they feel and their personal beliefs than what is actually true, then obviously the method by which we determine what is actually true about reality becomes kind of like public enemy number one. Or in the case of many people, it becomes sort of this double-edged sword by which you cherry pick the things that you want to be the truth, and then ignore anything that conflicts with your pre-existing worldview. People have always done this. Nothing about post-truth is particularly true. I mean, they had go back to the Gutenberg days. I mean, this stuff has been around for some time. But now it's sort of, we're at this pinnacle, and perhaps this is a way to root in or kind of break in some more of this stuff, is how cognitive biases play a role here in forming this sort of society, but also how the decline of traditional media and the rise of social media really fueled this sort of thing. So I guess hang on, let me close this door.
And then he left.
Edit.
Right.
Edit.
No, so just a quick rundown. So previous cable television. Let's go there, and then I'll bring it to the modern day. Cable television really came about, cable news television, around the 90s, if I'm not mistaken, 80s-ish, 90s-ish. I'm talking like CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, these sort of major news networks. And of course, CNN, I believe, was the first one that was just strictly 24-hour news kind of deal. And then Fox News came along to cover a conservative market, and MSNBC came along and cover a more liberal market. And these were successful for quite some time. However, the advent of the internet becoming so easily accessible changed that. And the introduction of social media like Facebook, I believe, was in like 2004 or something. And then, of course, YouTube and Twitter and all these other things. And eventually, like newspapers and cable news television stuff was really down, especially after the financial crisis. So we get into the teens and things are not looking that great for traditional media. And social media, of course, is meow. And then, of course, Trump shows up 2015, 2016. And this is like the panacea for all of this stuff, the news networks, etc. Matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think that was the most profitable year in history for some of those news networks, was
Certainly.
2016.
You'd have to show me the data against that. Like
Right.
I believe that on principle, right? You know what I mean? Like they were all over that, eating it up like candy.
Yeah, and honestly, it's they share some part of the blame for Trump being president, in my opinion. They made so much money off of viewership because they were showing Donald Trump, that it was profitable for them to just everything he did, Trump, Trump,
Even if
Trump,
they were
Trump, Trump,
downright
Trump.
making fun of him, you know.
Right. Anyways, I think this is a lot in part to blame for the way the place that we find ourselves in is, traditional media has declined. Traditional media in the sense of, in the before times when you could generally feel like you could trust what was being broadcasted over the airwaves, so to speak. I'm talking like back in the what's his name, that famous news reporter, oh my god. Oh, anyways, back in the days when I think, what is it, Watergate times, Gallup polls reported like 70 something percent of the American public felt like they could trust the news media, and recent polls in like the teens showed like that had dropped down to like 30 something percent. There's been a lot of
It should be a nice round figure.
Yeah.
No one should be trusting what they say.
Yeah. And then, of course, not to ramble on too much, but then now we have social media as, like, I'll be the first person to admit, I don't watch cable news. I get everything from this right here. Now, I do use cable news outlets and editorials and journals and things
As
like
they've
that.
transitioned to a more digital,
Right.
platform.
But because we have this now, there was no, speaking sort of generally, there was no easily accessible bullshit when it was coming across the television in mass. There might have been one channel that was like garbage, but now you can get all kind of opinions and viewpoints, and
In fact,
every single day something new.
As many as 10 bullshit outlets for every one, truthful one.
This might come off as strange, but I'd like to connect the internet to like some very old, like very, very old Christian theological precepts, and then kind of just kind of give you a cool analogy that might illuminate how I feel about the internet right now.
Sure, go right ahead, Jake. I mean, Trevor. No.
There we go. Yeah. So in ancient Jewish theology, you had this idea of like the Holy of Holies, the very center of the what would you call it? The tabernacle. Whenever the Jews were traveling around, like the Middle East, they had this big tabernacle that they would build, and also in their temples, it was essentially the same structure. We have the Holy of Holies in the very center.
The tabernacle is the small thing
in the very
in the
center.
middle.
And then the
Yeah.
whole thing would be considered the...
Yeah, they would build the big tent and things around it, right?
Yes, 3 layers. You have the very center. You have the very center, the tavern, the holy of holies that only the highest priest could go to, and only once a
Exactly.
day, only only once a year. Sorry, only once a year. It was a very holy place. Only one person, And then after that, you had like the wider complex for a greater assortment of people, but still very holy. And then the outerest section, which you still had to clean yourself to enter into, but nevertheless, a lot of people in. One of the interesting parts of Christian theology is when you see the movement over into what became Christianity, is you see what they considered to be the breaking open. They considered, if you're taking this from a Christian perspective, that Christ opened up the doors to the Holy of Holies, and he let everyone move in a step closer. Where now everyone, all the Christians, could enter into the closest tier, and then like up here above at the Holy of Holies, which you might consider in a basic cathedral, the area that you step onto, you first must absolve yourself of all sins, but you could step onto, and that's where the priest would be, and in the pulpit from which he would speak. It was this breaking open. It's a very interesting idea in Christian theology, the progression, moving closer to God. It's one of those things that they did. Why did I bring all that up? Well, up until recently, you had this idea of information, of news being delivered primarily from fact-check sources or sources of media, which were produced, worked on, and released to a general audience. And there was a little bit of a wall or a barrier to get to that point. You need to have a lot of money. You needed to have some sort of funding. It needed to be profitable, and you had to generate some sort of thing that allowed yourself to be able to disperse information. You had things a little further in, like radio, where people could disperse it a little bit more easily, disperse information. But nevertheless, there was still that wall there that you had to traverse. In a similar precept to what you would consider that early Christian precept, we see this today, in this age. You see this breaking open, this opening up, just like what you saw in the Christian church, of the walls and the entering in of the entirety of humanity, of all of mankind, into the chapel walls to then take part in the circus of ideas, in the theater of ideas, and give their ideas and net information out there freely. It's now a situation where all of humanity is perfectly capable. Like, I've seen homeless people with smartphones. Everyone is dispersing information into the Academy of Ideas, into the ecosystem of ideas all around us. And we're not quite sure how to encounter it yet. I'm reminded of that period in human history after the, was it the 19th Amendment or the 21st Amendment, when women got women's suffrage movement. And you see the movement and progression of women into the workforce and that sort of thing. That created a new paradigm that the entirety of our culture had to readjust to and invigorate,
Shift
towards. I think we're in one of those. I think we're in a situation where we have to attenuate to a new state of affairs. That new state of affairs is the blowing open of information. And it's no longer about fact checking. It's just this huge pool, this huge sea of information raging here and there from all sorts of perspectives. If you scroll through X or Twitter or Facebook, what you're going to see is very, very, very disparate opinions. But it's, as strange as it sounds, this sounds horrifying, but as strange as it sounds, I would say it's necessarily a good thing. It's as if I've mentioned this before, but it's as if we've created a sensor, a device from which all of us could see each other across the entire world. You're no longer talking to your village anymore. You're now talking to the entire planet. And now you feel when what happened in South, what's it called, that town in the UK where those stabbing victims happened recently? What was that called? South something. Not South Side. But there was a terrible stabbing there. A series of children were killed while, or not a series, a group of children were killed while trying to do Taylor Swift dances. You are now privy to that information, and it irks you while you're all the way on the other side of the world. That's never happened before. You are now attuned to the entire world. You feel the rhythm of the entire world all around you, inside of you right now. No wonder you think it's all on fire, because you feel all of it all at once. The entire world is alight in you. Like you have a kind of worldly consciousness that no other human being up until this point has had. You've gone from a village consciousness to one of your nation to now the entire planet. You feel the rippling sensation of a civil war in Venezuela. You feel all of these things happening across the entire planet. It's quite interesting. You can
It's
see
an
their
extension
faces.
of
You
us
could read their
being
emotions.
eusocial, you know.
Yes, it's a whole new thing. It's a sort of like hive consciousness is so sci-fi sounding, but it's this creation of a new state of affairs, a new state of consciousness necessarily, and one where you see all of it. You see all of the information. You always knew there were Nazis, but now you actually can argue with them and see their point of view.
You can
You
punch them
know?
in the face on the street.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but
Oh, I would. No.
well, that's a conversation in itself. But it's one of those things where you now see all of it. It's no longer about the KKK doing their like meetings in the 70s where no one else is there and they drink their beers and say their ideas. Now it's in your face. It's right in your face. And what's weird is there's considerably, as a proportion of the population, there's considerably less of them. But it burns and irks you so much more than it ever has before. And I think in the end that's a good thing. And I think you need to be aware of these things. You always needed to be aware of these things. You're just so much more than you've ever been before. And when you see all of it all at once and you think it's all on fire, I mean to tell you that sure it's on fire, but it's considerably less so than it's ever been before. And it's because you feel it, the embers against your very skin, closer to you now than your jugular vein. That's a little bit of blasphemy there for anyone who. Anyway, I'll end there, but I do think it's important to visualize this whole information age, this diaspora of ideas, according to that lens instead, not as like, oh, how do we fix this? It's like, oh, well, how do we encounter the new state of affairs?
A very positive outlook, right? What's the opposite of cynicism? I can't recall right now.
Or wait,
like you know, like stepping out of being a cynic, out of being a stoic, and so on. Like the most positive thing you could say about what Trevor's pointing out here is the idea that this might be the way that we come together as a species. Probably not, but you know, like I said, the most positive thing you could say is that it might be this way, because we literally have all of these disgusting foibles of culture, right, out there, and now that they're out there, they're in the kind of light, and they will either survive in the market of ideas, or hopefully they will not. And whenever all of those ideas are kind of burned away, those anti-human ideas such as racism and religion, you know, maybe it will be a better time, much ahead, you know, when information is so free. And we're just kind of at the start of it. I don't believe anything I just said, but you know, I hope it's true. I mean, you know, I hope this is the beginning of our Star Trek arc. That would be neat.
Oh, I would love, yeah.
But
so listen to this. This might provoke some thought of him, and this is really maybe just a way of repackaging some stuff that we've already talked about. But this chapter 6 in this book, again, this book that I'm referencing is called PostTruth by MIT Press. It is by Lee McIntyre, if anybody is interested in seeing where I'm sourcing a lot of this stuff from. But this chapter is called "Did Postmodernism Lead to Post-Truth?" And so it starts off with referencing sort of literary analysis, literary criticism, and basically going, well, here are some things, you know, we may not be able to know exactly what the author meant just reading the text. We may want to deconstruct the text and then try and find maybe different potential meanings. And then, of course, that became, well, everything's like that. We can deconstruct everything. And so I really particularly liked here there's a quote here by a guy, looks like 100 years before postmodernism as one of its precursors, writing on Friedrich Nietzsche. Alexis Papazoglu, I mean, Friedrich Nietzsche wrote 100 years, not this person, but this Alexis writes, once we realize that the idea of an absolute objective truth is a philosophical hoax, the only alternative is a position called perspectivism, the idea that there is no one objective way the world is, only perspectives on what the world is like. And this sounds like Trevor time traveled and went and wrote this. But the writer of the text that I'm referencing here says, think of this, what I just said, as the first thesis of postmodernism. There's no such thing as objective truth. So now we have maybe a starting point for where some of these ideas come from. And then secondly,
and my retort to that would be, if there's no such thing as an objective truth, then upon what are we making perspectives?
Right.
I mean, my goodness.
The second thesis of postmodernism, that any profession of truth is nothing more than a reflection of the political ideology of the person who is making it. And so I feel like this could contribute to the way that some people are thinking, especially if you are in the science denial camp, because again, this is the method, this is the best way that we as human beings have figured out how to determine what's actually true, is through science. By the virtue of science, we come to know, in the most objective way I think that's possible. I'm definitely the last person who's going to get bogged down in, well, we don't know everything, and so therefore there can be no. I'm like, cut the bullshit. This is a method that has demonstrated time and time again to provide us reliable results that have had a net benefit on our society. And yet there are all of these people who seek to make science their enemy. And I'm not saying it's infallible. I just think is there really that much to gain by denying what we can discover about the natural world?
So I can speak from personal experience on that one, Bray. There is everything to gain by science denial. You can convince anyone of anything if you deny the science.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about this often, like the bite method, or the bite model, whatever. How do you know if you're in a cult? Behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. Okay, informational control, control of what you read and know and stuff. Oh my goodness, like that's been the most successful tactic in probably our whole history. And the reason why, there's been so much death and devastation in the past. It's not just a war for resources or things like that. I mean, the idea that, for example, that people of a Jewish faith or ethnicity are subhuman led to the entirety of Hitler's Germany. Of course, it wasn't that idea alone, but you get what I'm saying. Like, you have everything to gain by denying the science. You can reap so much out of people. You can literally take the piss out of them by denying the science. And
Right.
there are so many people who kind of scoot along the top that way. They see what others have done, and then they patent it, and then they package it, and then they got to sell it. They got to sell it. You know what I mean? The Ian Malcolm line from Jurassic Park. I'm serious though. I mean, they it's like they enjoy what science has done to this point, and then they just kind of put a cap on it. They're like, okay, that's fine with me, but all this other stuff that I made up out of my ass, like, that's the stuff I'm really interested in. You know what I mean? because
and that's where the feeling comes in. That's where the personal beliefs come in, and I feel like personal belief here is used in such a way that sort of insinuates that the personal belief is at conflict with what may be discovered through scientific methodology.
and it can
you
be,
know,
and it often
Be-
is.
right?
One thing I'd like to say about this, about like being anti-science, for a lot of people, I've met a lot of people who you might consider, or one would say, that are anti-science. And if you're just if you would like to enter their consciousness for a moment, it's usually not so cut and dry as I can control people. Those people exist who use it as a way to control others. That is a fact.
Well, what
Is a fact.
I would like to add
but I
just a
mean
little
to
there. Just add a
go
little
ahead.
there. That they're either controlling. If they're anti-science, they're either controlling others or being controlled. We should mention
Yes.
that as well, Trevor.
It's a good point to make. But I mean to open up the door a little bit to other states of consciousness that could be against science. So for example, a lot of people, I know quite a few people who are creationists, or what do they call it now? They don't call it creationism anymore.
Young
They call
Earth or whatever.
Well,
No,
young Earth is
Young
there
Earth,
a new term?
Yes, there is, specifically for creationism, because it doesn't sound scientific. They
In-
use a
in-
scientific
intelligent
sounding
design.
name. Intelligent design, yeah.
Oh,
They
okay,
say
yeah.
That's
intelligent
not new,
design because
Trevor.
it,
It's
yes.
not new.
Well,
it was
they
in the
certainly
courts
don't say
in the
creationism.
90s.
It's true, but they keep to that. And they've let go of creationism. So if you were to ask a intelligent design person, like, are you anti-science? A lot of them will say no. They will say, like, I'm just following the correct theory, and that's usually if you're going to explore the state of
The God
consciousness of these
hypothesis.
people. Well, that's yes. So a lot of them, they see themselves as evaluating the world according to not through brandishing control over others, but just they get their ego, their will, through this one thing, and they see themselves as inside the true viewpoint there, and then everyone else are people that are outside of it. Now, these people usually haven't explored all the way down where the rabbit hole goes. That is to say, they haven't really looked into what evolution is, and how very, very difficult it is to refute evolution and refute how old the planet is, let alone the universe. But nevertheless, if we're going to explore their consciousness, that's usually what it is. It's usually a state of consciousness that's not fully explored. That is to say, that they haven't gone through and read, like I've just said. But nevertheless, that is what it is. It's not necessarily about power or control.
I disagree.
Yeah, go on.
I just flat disagree. So, and this a lot of this will be my personal story coloring, facets of this. But there's so many examples of like pastors and cult leaders and preachers who don't believe anything of what they're saying. That. In other words, I should say it this way. It is kind of necessary to assume that it's about power and control until otherwise proven.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, like, in order to safeguard yourself and others, you need to assume it's about control and power until otherwise proven. Let's return to the Trump stuff. That's a cult. As a former cult member, as a former cult leader, as a former person groomed into being a cult person, it's a cult, people. Like, you do not go around wearing diapers in public without it being a cult. You don't do all that they do without it being a cult.
Wait, who's wearing diapers in public?
Yes.
What?
There's
the diaper lady, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, you don't do these things without being in need of therapy.
Unironically.
Yeah, ironically, sure,
Yeah.
whatever. I don't believe you. So what I mean to say is that, in my personal experience, I've met so many people who it was about power and control there at the top of a cult. And you cannot convince me. I mean, short of allowing me to to Professor X my way into Trump's brain, which cannot be done, that it's not about power and control. You cannot convince me. Like I say, it's about our safety and
Right.
so on. It's about our assumptions, and we should assume their ill intent until proven otherwise. When it comes to such an important thing, and when it comes to such a thing as altering your beliefs.
So have a little listen to this here as we start winding down here. I want to try to wrap up some of the postmodernism talk for this, and then we can close out maybe talking about how should we, as maybe as good citizen scientists, perhaps fight against this sort of idea or this new society. So this is in the closing of the stuff on postmodernism here. There's a quote by none other than Dan Dennett, who we should all be familiar with. In 2017, he had an interview with The Guardian, and he flat out blames postmodernism for the PostTruth Society. And he says philosophy has not covered itself in glory in the way it has handled these questions of fact and truth. He goes, maybe people will now begin to realize that philosophers aren't quite so innocuous after all. Sometimes views can have terrifying consequences that might actually come true. I think what postmodernists did was truly evil. They are responsible for the intellectual fad that made it respectable to be cynical about truth and facts. You'd have people going around saying, well, you're part of the crowd who still believe in facts. And so, you're thinking maybe this is an exaggeration that he's saying, surely there aren't people going around doing this sort of thing. But they immediately follow up here with this sort of block of text here that I'm going to try to summarize. During Trump's election, 2016, a lot of his support came from online bloggers and people, just like we were talking about this sort of new pocket of social media where now people can do their own news, and millions of people can see it. This guy, Mike Cernovich, was a pro-Trump American nationalist, conspiracy theory, yada, yada, yada. But he's been all over the place. But he was instrumental in contributing to those sort of crazy, they seem so far gone now. Like, who cares about these anymore except for a fringe few? The Hillary was dying or something like that, or the Pizzagate thing, or the sex slavering out of the pizza thing, or the satanic
Oh
sex
my
cult,
goodness.
all that, on and
Yeah.
on and on. Huge about pushing those kind of things. And so on and so forth. Well, in a New Yorker article, I believe we have this little nugget right here. I believe this is Cernovich here. Let's say, for the sake of argument, and this was the guy I was trying to think of earlier, Walter Cronkite. He goes, let's say for the sake of argument that Walter Cronkite lied about everything. Before Twitter, how would you have known? Look,
Yeah.
he goes, I read postmodernist theory. I read postmodernist theory in college. If everything is a narrative, then we need alternatives to the dominant narrative. I don't look like a guy who reads Lacan, do I? But this is a
That's funny.
guy, with a law degree, it says, and he makes a point, if there is no truth and it's all just perspective, then how do we ever really know anything? And so, again, this kind of makes me think, it's like, moving into a thing of how do we fight this? Like, if the one thing that we have to sort of really determine any sort of objective truth is science, and that has become sort of, it's being stamped on, in my opinion,
Attacked.
frankly,
Yeah.
then what do we use to come back against, how do we prop truth back up again and not these alternative truths?
I think the postmodern perspective, the people that say there is no fact anymore, when they try to trot on science, are making a kind of a huge category error. I think there is a nuance to perspectivism, is the idea that Nietzsche brings forth in his time. This idea that truth isn't a painting that can be viewed from one point. It's instead a sculpture from which it can be viewed from many points. But the substance that makes up that sculpture can be seen via science. That's what science is. This is one of those moments where I think it's David Hume that says you cannot derive an ought from an is. When we speak of science, we speak of is. We speak of is.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you right now that dopamine in your brain is produced by the substantia nigra. That's what it's produced by. That's why it's a black substance, because it's filled with dopaminergic neurons. Now that's an is. That's what happens. Now you can't give me any information that runs counterantithetical to that. That is also true. That is a true thing. It is an is. It's when we enter into the academy of ideas of what to do once we're in this space with our dopamine intact and go off and do what we do in this life, that you can then have this nuanced conversation, this postmodern perspective of what to do with narratives. But you can't trot on science while you do that. You can't produce, you can't interject from the realization that oughts are themselves things that well up from within, to then interject and attack what science is presently trying to do, the methodology that is done. Starting with Galileo, that produces this idea that you can't just theorize, you need evidence to then produce a workable theory that leads to like our understanding of classical mechanics and physics. That was derived from what we can derive from our senses, what's before us, what's physically available. We can derive information that is. And you can't, in this world, in this life, it is true that it's very difficult for you to find a bedrock from which you can find what you ought to do in this day, in the dawn of your new day. It is quite difficult at the start, especially when you're young, to find meaning, to find inherent meaning. It's very hard. But from that terror of inner nihilism, you may want to attack what is around you, the sculpture itself. But I will tell you now that is actually untrue. You can't produce.
That's a very bad idea. Yeah.
You can't break. You can't break the sculpture. You can only look a fool, and that's essentially what we have here. This category error. I mean to create this distinction between what the postmodernists attack, narratives such as like communism versus capitalism versus this versus that. And you look for a bedrock in that after God is uplifted, like the carpet underneath is just pulled. Once the ground is pulled away, the oddness of this reality, of the scaffolding from which we build our towers, becomes not steel but sand. I think that is a nuanced conversation, and a scary one too, but one you need to have with yourself, and one that we all need to have. But I don't believe that interjects upon the sculpture, reality itself, and that's the fundamental mistake that's being made now. And that's essentially what we're seeing in the Academy of Ideas. And you will see again and again, and this is why I'm an optimist about this, that once more into the breach, you'll see these people attack what is. You'll see them attack what is. Try to say that the Earth is only 6,000 years old, something like that. They will do these things, and they will make a fool of themselves. And there are also going to be scientists that try to say that there is no such thing as a endoplasmic reticulum, like, the data that shows that it's there is actually bog, and they'll do that. Like, people will come up with theories and theories and theories to try to make sense of this reality, and it'll bear out to be untrue, and we'll leave it aside because it's untrue, and we'll move forward. And that's essentially what we have now. Fight against what is, if you like. We'll return to what is, because it's the one thing that has a spine, and we'll return to it doesn't have this issue. At the very least, once you get to a certain size, we can get into the quantum stuff at some point.
I would like to plug a book that ties in perfectly with what Trevor was just talking about. It's called Existential Physics by my best girl, Sabine Hassenfelder. All right. So I was on vacation and I picked it up. And just quick aside about what Trevor was talking about, can you attack what is? You certainly can. And you will be made fun of. I mean, you know what I mean?
You should be made fun of.
You should be made fun of. But no, seriously, she put it very eloquently in the chapter concerning, like, where did we come from? Basically, this book is all about big questions and what the science, what the physics has to say about it. Okay. And so she goes, look, people, you cannot disprove someone who says that 6,000 years ago, a dude fiddled with all the knobs and things and put the world exactly as it is, fossils and all. I mean, all of it for your benefit and so on. You cannot disprove them. It's just that it's so much simpler an explanation without it, And she started talking about the scientific process and its true value, and that is, she refers to it as an evolution law, and all that means is like, what equation could we have that would produce all of what we see around us, right? And so the equation kind of thing you would need to say, okay, well, the Earth is 6,000 years old, the universe is 6,000 years old, and so on, or 10,000, or whatever. Their Hindu beliefs that say that the Earth and universe are much older than what we know them to be, much older than 14 billion years. Whatever you like, you have to say, okay, well, the equation for that one is so much more complicated. All this matter had to be exactly put in that place, and it's so much more complicated than saying, well, a very long time ago, some natural forces were at work and made all that we see. The point I'm trying to make is that, I'm kind of moderating this one. We talked about culture versus truth. And actually, Bray, I'm very happy you brought up Dan Dennett. I saw something from him the other day that was very gorgeous, but I'll talk about that later. Culture versus truth. And then we talked as well, and we're talking about the nature of knowledge, right? And so my little perspective on this as a science educator, as a science communicator, or whatever, is if this is the sum total of like your like ideas about the world around you, as a science educator, I want this much of it to be backed by science. I really loved what Bray said earlier. I want this much of it to be your personal beliefs. I tell my students often, like they'll say that doesn't work for me, and I say it's not about you. And the first time that I tell them that, they look like they've been smacked, and I'm like, that was not meant as an insult. I mean that in the most friendly way. It's not about you. It's about the data. It's not about me or you or anyone. It's about the data. And
it's about all mankind. There is a moment.
Exactly. And it's such a teachable moment. You can see them working this out in their head, and they're like, I know Mr. Kyle did not just smack me across the face like this. So what's he trying to tell me? And a lot of them get it. A lot of them get it first time. But some of them persist all year. But usually by the time of the end of the year, they're on board with me, and they're like, okay, I get it. It's not about me. I really need to think about this. And that is my whole job. I could care less, to be honest with you, about the particulars. Like, I mean, if they understand the nature of the electron and so on, it's like, I don't care about that. We don't understand the full nature of the electron. You know what I mean? So I just want you to get enough of it. What I really want you to get is that philosophy of science. And anyway, the point I was trying to get to is...
doing the Lord's work, Stephen, our Lord and
yeah,
Savior, Sir Francis Bacon.
Trying to, but the nature of knowledge is what I wanted to get to. I love what Bray said earlier. We need to be reminded often what we do not know, right? I mean, so like this post-truth idea, how can we vet the stuff coming to us by assuming we don't know, by assuming we can only go off evidence. No evidence, no belief. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I remember back in the philosophy club days, I regularly went to Dr. Koski's office, and this was when I was sort of learning more about actual like historical skepticism, not just like skepticism like you took it out of the dictionary as a word.
Right.
And I had trouble like figuring. I was trying to understand like what could possibly be wrong with just being like to an absurd amount skeptical, because I was like all about
Sure.
people making, just like you said, like it's impossible to disprove a 6,000-year-old, or there's all kind of claims that are unfalsifiable. Perhaps we can say.
Well, that's what they are. It's just I didn't want to use that term in
Oh,
case
sure.
for the listener, but they are unfalsifiable claims.
And so I remember having to sort of talk with him and come to an understanding that you can be too skeptical. You can be like there is a limit. We hang in a delicate balance. And so I look at this sort of postmodern idea of, and I really like the way that Trevor illustrated it as like a sculpture, and we
Yeah,
can
that's a
look
good
at
one.
something from very many different ways or angles, but that doesn't change what the actual sculpture, what the actual like the monolith of truth about reality is. And we certainly don't want to take a hammer and smash it apart, and then leave everyone trying to figure out what is from the pieces on the floor. Um, so and maybe for a lot of people, it's uncomfortable to gaze upon such a sculpture. I'm really running with this analogy. I like, but
It
that
is
doesn't
hard.
change the fact that it is, you know. And so and I think that's where we have to support each other, sort of in the spirit of what we leave people with on this show is you need to support each other and take care of each other, um, in these trying times. Just like for you, Stefan, saying, coming out of this sort of cult-like atmosphere is like, well, the last thing you want to do is come out of an environment like that and have nowhere to turn or nothing to cling on to afterward.
Right.
Um, so there's a little bit of extra stuff here in the last couple of paragraphs of this about fighting post-truth that I really liked. Uh, I then earlier on, it's like, the lesson here is that one must always fight back against lies. We should never assume that any claim is, quote, too outrageous to be believed, which might as well
But
sum up the
but that's
entire
perfect. That's perfect,
2016
Ray.
election.
We come to the last point I literally wrote right here. Moderating. We must all
Mm-hmm.
be philosophers. Go ahead.
Exactly. No, that's it. And as weird as it is to say, from the earliest days of the philosophy club, I would sit around and be like, man, why isn't everybody doing this? And as like hubris filled and like, as unhumble as that might sound, I'm just like, why isn't everybody like out here just trying to discover what is, and like reading more and doing all of these things? Um, and I guess that has something to do with personal beliefs and personal feelings. But on here, they end this with great examples here, as far as looking at this postmodernism and stuff like that. And it talks about the Challenger space shuttle. It said the science that had been used to create the shuttle had been rigorous. This was not the first mission of the Challenger. Things were supposed to be good. But of course, we all know that ended tragically in the Challenger space shuttle disaster. And so why people are like, why had everything been sent up if something was clearly wrong?
It
And
wasn't clear.
so
That's the point.
Right. And then, of course, this here says that the shuttle was scheduled due to an administrative decision that was made over the objection of some NASA engineers, which might as well be a parable as old as time. But,
Seriously.
None other than Richard Feynman says
Yep.
was the one that demonstrated, quite literally in the courtroom in the hearings, with the ice water and all of this, dunking the things to show that they were, there were issues with components of the spacecraft, and that was the facts. I mean, that might as well have been Richard Feynman walking in there and unveiling the sculpture of reality, like Trevor was saying,
or at least hiking up the curtain on it to where you could see its ankles or something like that.
right?
You know what I mean?
Right? Yeah, he's revealed just enough.
Just enough.
This is the truth.
Well, think about it. Think about it. You have to think about it. He was talking to like congressmen
Mm-hmm.
who are like historically stupid. You know what I mean? And so he's got this little O-ring. I've seen this whole interview. He's got this little O-ring, and he's like, look at this, stretchy, and then he puts it.
Right.
He's like, not stretchy. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's like literally one chimp, one ape simian looking at a Congress, a literal Congress of simians, going, look at
Right.
look at it. You have to see it. I mean, it's
And
true.
I love this quote too. That soon after he released a statement saying that for a successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations, for nature cannot be fooled. And that is
Yeah.
chef's
You-
kiss. Like, really put a bow on this topic, this episode even. But yeah, again, this
we
book
cannot
is
alter the laws of nature because we want
Post-Truth
to.
Lee McIntyre. Yeah, we you can only get so far by being willfully ignorant or purposefully ignoring, purposely avoiding what is. Eventually, that will bite you in the ass. It may bite people in the ass that you care about and you love. So again, it's my sentiment from earlier is like, why isn't everybody doing this? Why aren't some people just throwing themselves at the science, at the whatever? But this is the world we find ourselves in. So
Sure. Trevor, any last words for us?
Well, I think the discussion y'all just had about Richard Feynman kind of just puts a really neat bow on everything.
Yeah.
I think in the courthouse at that moment, or in the with those congressmen at that hearing, I think, as you said, revealing the ankles of the sculpture, I think that really touches upon what we're trying to say. It's what is. The issue lies specifically, the actual issue, the thing that the postmodernists bring up that actually has value here and nuance and in fact, imminent danger that needs to be resolved is why you should care. Why you should care. That is where you're going to have serious issues. That the sculpture will offer you nowhere to hide, no
Right.
anchor, no pole from which to judge yourself. From is you will not find uh, what to do, why, ought, where to go. You will not find these things, and that is where you'll find the difficulty of the matter. But don't lose heart just yet. We will likely discuss this further at some point, and I'm sure you
Mhm.
could figure it out on your own. After all, you're only another face of this universe and all that. Maybe that's a nice little way to end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bray, any last words?
Yeah, like I think we wrapped it up pretty nicely. I would just say, again, in the spirit of this show and sort of all that we try to profess is, be a good citizen scientist. Be good to each other. Do not fear the panopticon of reality that is, always present, always with you. Instead, I think you should embrace it wholeheartedly. Maybe to echo something we've said in a previous episode several episodes ago, imbue yourself with scientific practice and the scientific spirit. Do not turn away. There's a biblical quote in there somewhere that would have gone
Yeah,
marvelously, but yeah. Thanks for listening. Leave your comments in the comment section.
for sure.
Mm.
For sure. Well, this has been We Mortal Coils, and I will give our last parting words. As always, as Bray said earlier, you have to take care of each other. All right, we have to have some kind of place where our fellow creatures, our fellow humans and our fellow creatures, can go. In other words, if you know someone who's struggling with some kind of ideological framework, uh, you know, I know where you're at. It's not your business to help them. It's not your business to try and change their minds. But at the same time, what you can do is just tell them that they have a place whenever they get out of it, right? You don't have to say it in those words. You can always say something like, we can always talk, all right? I can't tell you how far that's gotten me in my few years on this earth, just telling people we can talk. I'll put on blast my own mother here for a minute. She's recently turned the corner on like some of the very big beliefs she had as we were growing up. We both grew up in this cult I talk about often. Um, her more so than me in many ways, just being from an older generation in it. But my point here is that for years we didn't talk about any of this stuff. I left her alone about it. I mean, I knew what I was talking about, and but I didn't put that on her. I didn't make sure she was uncomfortable or anything like that. I just let her go about life, and told her we can always talk. So that's what I would leave you with. Take care of each other in that way, and stay away from ideological frameworks in general. Have a good one.